The thing no one tells you about a flood is how silent it is afterward. There are no birds, no wind in the trees, just the heavy, wet sound of mud settling into the bones of a house, a slow, sucking noise that makes you feel like the earth itself is swallowing what's left. Tyler Evans stood in the center of what used to be a village square, his boots sinking 2 inches deep into the grit. The sun was out, which felt wrong somehow. It should have been raining. It should have been dark. But instead, the sky was this bright, mocking blue, and the light just made the devastation sharper. It was his 30th birthday. He was supposed to be at a steakhouse back in the States, one of those places where they bring out a sizzling plate and everyone sings off-key while you try not to look embarrassed. He was supposed to be celebrating 2 years with Clara, 2 years of Sunday morning coffee runs and late-night talks about everything and nothing, 2 years of her falling asleep on his shoulder during movies she swore she wanted to watch, then denying it the next morning with that stubborn little smile. 2 years of her leaving her coffee cups half-finished all over his apartment, something that drove him crazy at first until he realized he kind of loved the evidence that she'd been there. 2 years of something real and steady and good. Instead, he was holding a crowbar, staring at a yellow villa that was leaning at a 45-degree angle like it was too tired to stand up straight anymore. His team was scattered across the square, Brandon checking structural integrity on a collapsed awning, Dylan coordinating with the Italian civil protection volunteers, and Olivia restocking the medical tent with what little supplies they had left. They'd been on the ground for 3 days, and every muscle in Tyler's body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. But they weren't done. "Tyler! Movement on the second floor!" Tyler's head snapped up. He saw it, a flicker of white fabric in one of the upper windows of the leaning villa. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He didn't wait. He didn't think about the birthday he was missing or the life he'd left on pause back home. He just moved. The stairs were underwater. Tyler and Brandon waded through the first floor, the current still strong enough to pull at their legs. The smell was overwhelming. Sewage, chemicals, rot. Tyler tried not to breathe through his nose. "Stay close," Tyler said, his voice low and steady. "If this thing shifts, we're out." Brandon nodded, his jaw tight. They found the elderly couple huddled on a kitchen table on the second floor. The water was still rising, swirling around the legs of the furniture like a dark, living thing. The woman, Maria, Tyler would learn later, was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. The man, Paolo, had his arm wrapped around her shoulders, holding her close. "We have to go, now," Tyler said in Italian. He kept it short and direct. Paolo looked at him with eyes that were sharp despite the fear. He nodded once, then pointed at a submerged cabinet near the far wall. La borsa di tela," the canvas bag. Tyler's first instinct was to argue. They didn't have time. The water was rising. The building could collapse at any moment. But something in Paolo's face stopped him. Tyler handed his crowbar to Brandon and went under. The water was cold, shockingly cold, and it tasted like oil and earth and everything that shouldn't be in your mouth. But what struck him most was the silence. Even underwater, even with his pulse hammering in his ears, there was this awful, muffled quiet, like the world had been erased. He felt around blindly, his fingers scraping against wood and metal until they hit something heavy and rough. Canvas. He grabbed it and kicked hard, breaking the surface with a gasp. When he handed the bag to Paolo, the old man didn't check for money or jewelry. He didn't look for documents or keys. He fumbled with the seal of a gallon-sized Ziploc bag inside the canvas. He pulled it apart with a soft pop, revealing his personal Bible, old and leather-bound, and a stack of photos held together with a rubber band. The outside of the bag was slick with mud, but the book itself was perfectly dry. He clutched them to his chest like they were the only things keeping him afloat. Maria pressed her face into Paolo's shoulder and wept. Tyler felt something crack open inside him. Not break, just open, like a door he didn't know was locked. And for just a second, maybe two, his hands started shaking, not from the cold, not from exhaustion, from something he didn't have a name for. He shoved them into his pockets and turned towards Brandon, forcing his voice steady. "Let's get them out of here." At that moment, standing in 2 feet of filthy water in a crumbling house half a world away from home, Tyler realized that when everything is stripped away, when the world falls apart and there's nothing left but what you can carry, people only reach for what's eternal, not the things that make life comfortable, the things that make life matter. The realization that people only reach for what is eternal stayed with Tyler as they moved to the next grid. But that sense of clarity was quickly crowded out by a new kind of atmosphere as they approached the village edge. The cottage on the outskirts was different. The silence there was heavier, thicker, like the air itself was holding its breath. The smell of stagnant water and rotting wood was so thick in the air it was difficult to breathe. The humidity was a physical weight pressing down on them in the August heat. When they kicked the door in, the stench hit them first, sour, hot, and heavy. Then they found Elena. She was shoved onto the top of a heavy oak armoire in the corner of the living room, her 2 surviving children pinned under her arms. Their skin was slick with sweat and grime, their bodies limp from the heat and the terror. Her eyes were bloodshot and vacant. Tyler felt a wave of relief, but it was hollowed out by the sight of them. Then he saw the dining table. A small bundle sat there in the middle of the silt, wrapped in a soaked, muddy blanket. It didn't move. The team moved in. Dylan and Brandon waded through the waist-high sludge to reach the armoire. They worked in grim silence, lifting the 2 older children down first. The kids didn't even cry. They just clung to the men as they were carried out of the house into the stifling afternoon light. Tyler stayed back with Elena. He reached out, his hands steady as he helped her slide down from her high perch into the murky water. As soon as her feet hit the silt, the wall she'd built around herself crumbled. She collapsed against Tyler, her weight nearly pulling them both under. "The water," she sobbed, the sound raw and uncontrolled. "It came in so fast. I tried so hard, but I couldn't hold on to all 3. My littlest one, she just slipped out of my arms." She was shaking so hard the water around them rippled. Her sobs were the only sound in the rotting room. Tyler didn't try to offer a speech. He didn't have any words that could fix a mother's heart. He just held her steady in the mud and the heat, his own throat tight. He waited until she could breathe again, then he looked at her and the quiet bundle on the table. Tyler felt the familiar sting in his eyes, the burn that comes right before the tears, but he forced himself to stay present. His throat locked up. For a terrible, stretched-out moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He thought wildly, what if I can't do this? What if I don't have anything left to give her? The panic was sharp and cold, like something breaking under his ribs. He waded through the silt and knelt right in the mud next to Elena. "Posso pregare?" he asked softly. "Can I pray? For you and for the child?" Elena's nod was almost invisible, just the smallest movement of her chin. Tyler closed his eyes. "God," he whispered, his voice rough and low. "I don't have the words. I don't know why this happened or how Elena is supposed to carry this, but I'm asking you, begging you to take this little girl into your arms. Let her be in the sunlight. Let her be free from all this. And please, please give Elena a strength that isn't human to carry her through the next hour, through the next day, through whatever comes next." He paused, his throat tight. "We can't do this on our own. We need you." When he finished, the room didn't feel quite so empty, and for the first time all day, the silence didn't feel like it was crushing them. Elena reached and touched his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Back at the medical tent, the professional masks were off. Olivia and Megan, Two of the best nurses Tyler had ever worked with were sitting on the bumper of the supply truck, their faces buried in their hands. Their shoulders shook with silent sobs. They were trained for blood and bone, for trauma and triage, but they weren't trained for this kind of loss. Dr. Sharon didn't try to fix it with words. She didn't offer platitudes or clinical reassurances. She just sat down in the mud with them, her scrubs filthy and her hair falling out of its bun. She held their hands and prayed. She prayed for the peace that passes all understanding to fill the gaps their medicine couldn't reach. She prayed for rest, for hope, for the kind of comfort that only comes from something bigger than all of them. Tyler watched from a distance, leaning against the side of the tent. He should have felt something. Gratitude, maybe, or faith in action. But all he felt was numb, hollowed out, like he'd given everything away and didn't know what was left. He pushed off the tent and walked back toward the staging area, his legs moving on autopilot. That night, Tyler needed the smell of the river off of him. He spent 10 minutes under the freezing stream of a gravity shower, watching the gray silt swirl down the drain until the water finally ran clear. He didn't have the energy for a long soak, even if the water had been warm. By the time he stepped out and pulled on a dry shirt, he was shivering, but the oily film was gone. He sat on the edge of a cot, still looking for some kind of anchor. The generator hummed in the background, and someone was playing worship music softly from a Bluetooth speaker. Dylan and Brandon were already asleep, sprawled out on their cots like they'd been dropped from a height. Tyler pulled out his phone and looked at a photo from their anniversary dinner. Clara smiling at the camera, her eyes bright, her hand reaching across the table to hold his. She was wearing that blue dress he loved. But what he kept staring at tonight was the way her eyes looked a little sad around the edges, like she was already bracing for him to leave again. She'd asked him that night, quietly over dessert, "When are we going to stop planning our lives in 6-month deployments?" And he'd deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. He scrolled back and saw the text she'd sent 2 days ago. "I'm praying. I'm always praying. I love you. Come home safe." And then he remembered the notification he'd caught out of the corner of his eye yesterday. A second text that had flashed across his screen. "I'm tired of being brave about this, Ty." By the time he'd tapped the message to open it, it was gone. She'd deleted it 10 minutes later, but he'd already seen it. Tyler couldn't do this here, not with the noise of the camp and the guys sleeping nearby. He grabbed his phone and stepped out of the tent, heading for the line of parked utility vehicles until he found a white Chevy truck. He climbed into the cab, and the door closed with a heavy, muted thud that cut the generator's hum in half. In the dark cabin, it was finally quiet. He knew a call wouldn't go through with the service flickering, but he opened the voice memo app and hit record. "Clara, hey, it's me. I don't even know what time it is there. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. He stopped, took a breath. I needed to hear myself say this out loud before I lost my nerve. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of mud across his forehead. "I'm at the base camp. We lost a little girl today. She was maybe 3 years old, and her mom, God, Clara, her mom was just holding her other kids and trying to survive, and I could see in her eyes that she didn't know how she was going to get through the next 5 minutes, let alone the rest of her life." His voice cracked again. "And I've been thinking about what matters, about what people hold on to when everything else is gone. And I realized I've been a coward. I've been acting like we have forever, like there's always going to be more time. But we don't know that. None of us do." He took a shaky breath. "I saw your text, the one you deleted, and you're right to be tired, babe. I've been asking you to be brave while I've been too scared to actually commit. That ends now." He smiled, even though his eyes were wet. "I'm coming home Thursday, and when I get there, I have a question I should have asked you a year ago, maybe longer, and I'm not waiting another second. Pray for us, babe. I love you. I'm so in love with you it scares me. and I'm done being scared. He sent the recording, watching the single bar of service flare as the message status flipped to delivered. 48 hours later, Tyler was standing on Clara's porch. He was still wearing his tactical boots, stained with the dust of a valley half a world away. His duffel bag was at his feet. He hadn't showered. He hadn't slept more than a few hours on the plane. He'd gone straight from the airport to her apartment because he couldn't wait. Not one more second. When Clara opened the door, she froze. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the new lines around his eyes. She didn't say a word. She just stepped into his arms. Tyler held her so tight he was afraid he might hurt her, but she didn't pull away. She just pressed her face into his chest and breathed him in, sweat and mud and all. "You're home," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "I'm home." He pulled back just enough to look at her, to really look at her. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a polished speech. He didn't have anything except the truth. "Clara, I saw a man lose everything this week," he said, his hands framing her face. His house, his neighborhood, everything he'd spent his whole life building. And the only thing he cared about, the only thing he went back for, was his Bible and the woman standing next to him. His thumbs brushed away the tears that were starting to spill down her cheeks. "I don't want to spend another day just dating you. I don't want to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect plan. I want to be the man standing next to you for the rest of our lives, through the floods and the fires and everything in between. Will you marry me?" Clara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Yes," she said, her hands gripping the front of his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Tyler kissed her then, right there on the porch, with his boots covered in mud and his heart finally whole. And for the first time in 2 weeks, the silence didn't feel heavy, didn't feel like something pressing down on his chest, stealing his breath. It felt like peace. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you." Isaiah 43:2.